The Syrian regime updates its list of the dead. After years of silence, families find out the fate of their missing loved ones. Is it a step forward or an admission of war crimes? I'm Adnan Nawaz. Today's newsmakers are Syria's death notices. 7.5 years into Syria's war, the regime has updated its public records of thousands of people who have died in detention. Families desperate for answers have lined up at registration centres to see if their relatives are on the list. The dead don't talk, and the details issued so far mention heart attacks or strokes as the main causes of death. But Amnesty International says mass executions account for at least 13,000 dead. And what about the timing? Why now? Some believe Russia persuaded Bashar al-Assad to publish the death notices as a first step towards reconciliation. Others argue it's Assad's way of declaring victory. Abu Bakr al-Shamahi has this report.
One face, and then another, and then another. These are Syria's missing, or they were. For years, people like activist Yahya Shurbaji had simply disappeared after being arrested, but official regime registers have revealed over the past few weeks that he and numerous other missing Syrians died in prison. They were often arrested for taking part in protests beginning in 2011 that called for Bashar al-Assad to step down. This video was filmed in 2011 in Daraya outside Damascus. The protesters were calling for peaceful change. The man leading the chants is Majd al-Khonani. He was soon arrested, along with his brothers Abd al-Sattar and Muhammad. Muhammad was confirmed dead after a whistleblower released photos of dead prisoners. Years later, documents reveal that they have all died.
Today, the regime gave us their death certificates. So the regime has just condemned itself. If there is justice in the world, the regime has to be held to account.
The Syrian Network for Human Rights says 85,000 people have disappeared across Syria since the war began, with 90% taken by the regime. The human rights group has documented 532 cases of missing people now listed as deceased by the regime, but other groups say the toll is much higher. Why has the regime chosen to start revealing prisoners' fates now? It may believe it's on the verge of victory. In recent months, it's been able to advance on rebel-held territory in the Damascus suburbs, as well as Daraa in the south. With the help of Russia and Iran, it's now in a commanding position across the country. For Fadwa Mahmoud, that's bad news. Her husband Abdelaziz and son Maher were taken by the regime in 2012, while Fadwa escaped to Germany.
One after the other, the lists are coming. I'm not going to ask about the fate of my son and husband, because I will always have hope. And even if their names did come, I'm not going to believe it, because they're more powerful than death itself.
Many relatives of the people on the lists believe their loved ones were tortured to death or executed. As hundreds of these families adjust to the news of their losses, Abdelaziz and Maher remain missing, their fates unknown, and Fadwa waits for their return. Abu Bakr al-Shamahi, the newsmakers.
With me here in the studio is the spokesperson for the opposition Syrian Negotiation Commission, Yahya al-Aridi. Joining us from Damascus is Amar Wakaf. He's the founder of the Middle East-focused think tank Gnosos. In Doha, we have Fadel Abdul Ghani, the founder of the Syrian Network for Human Rights. And in Moscow, the former Russian diplomat Vyacheslav Matuzov. Gentlemen, all, thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers. Amar, I'd like to start with you. Many people would say that the details in this list are an admission of guilt by Bashar al-Assad's regime. What do you say to that?
We're yet to understand what happened. These full lists, in a sense, can be positively looked at as a prelude to closing a hideous chapter in this very hideous war that we're having here in Syria. And in a sense, this could have, hopefully a positive impact. People can settle their nerves, know that their loved ones have either deceased or not deceased, expect them to get out at some point, and so on and so forth. So in a sense, this could be, a good step forward.
Yeah, but you know that timeline that you're mentioning about closing a certain chapter, that's only part of the issue. And you say people will know if their loved ones are deceased or not deceased. That's the bottom line. But what about how they died, why they were detained in the first place? Surely it's not believable that the majority of these people died because of heart attacks. That surely can't be the case. And you well know, it's been well documented, what has happened to people in detention who have been held by Bashar al-Assad's forces. There are those details that are not here in this list. It's not complete.
Well, obviously we won't condone anything or any wrongdoing in a sense, but I think it's naive to assume that everybody that was taken in or taken by the security forces, arrested and so on and so forth, are peaceful demonstrators who want progress for their country. Some of them, actually a good number of them, are proved terrorists who have facilitated smuggling of guns, information for people to be killed and so on and so forth. They've committed crimes themselves. We're yet to understand whether those who were killed after some judicial process or express judicial process or whatever, or just died of malnutrition in a prison and so on and so forth. There is yet to be confirmation on that, and I think there is going to be a long process of that. But what we know for sure that this is not, there is no government monopoly in these things. When Eastern Ghouta was liberated a few months back, the expectation was that 5,000 detainees would come out of that place who were detained by the rebels and so on and so forth, and only about 200 of them came out. Many parents broke down, and there was a huge issue at the time. Most of the detainees were either Syrian army operatives at the time when they were abducted or killed, or probably peaceful civilians who, for example, in Adra, the labor city of Adra, women and children, some of whom we saw in cages paraded in Douma, for example. So there is a lot of mischief around that point. Now, what we meant by closing of a chapter is that once people understood that they're not going to see their loved ones anymore, they would be more ready, hopefully, to close a certain chapter and say, okay, let's engage in something else. If there is someone who I love who have deceased or is not going to show up anymore, then there are hundreds of thousands of others, and I'm ready to turn the chapter. Hopefully that would be the case.
Okay. Yahya, your initial thoughts about this list, and we'll come on to the other chapter later.
Okay, well, 2 points drew my attention to what Ammar said in his intervention. One thing about Al-Ghouta, where they had 5,000 people and 2 of them showed up. And this should be addressed, really. The only description for those people in Ghouta were called terrorists. And what he is implying by what he's saying is that many of them died in jail. Then what applies to those people in Ghouta as terrorists then applies to the regime as a terrorist. Well, the other thing I want to talk about is that there are certain facts about taking people to jail by the Assad regime. One of the basic facts is that those people were taken as hostages. The impact of taking them into jail doesn't influence them personally, but it influences immediately their family, their loved ones, and the people who know them. If, for instance, the regime got 500,000 people, it means that the impact is on 5 million people of the 23 million people in Syria. So this trend by the Assad regime followed in taking people to jails for very simple reasons. In a peaceful way, for instance, saying no to the regime or putting a like on a post or being neutral, being not completely submissive to the regime, you are subject to be taken to jail and you probably die. Another thing is that drew attention in Ammar's statement is that the case of those people who were detained by the regime and the fact that the regime is sending notification to their families that they died because of this or that, is that it was a case in doubt. Now it is a case in certainty that those people died under torture. And this is a real indictment, and we don't really know who gave this advice to the regime. to expose this thing, and now they are thinking that they can remove this file. In reality, somebody who is leading the regime to The Hague when they expose these things and become in a case of certainty that those people died in jail under torture. And we have testimonies for that. We have data, we have we have files documented, and the Caesar's photos are a very important example regarding this issue. 11,000 photos were shown to the American Congress that this is the case of Syrians in Assad's jails. This is a very important fact that need to be investigated, and this is the best way for taking those who tortured Syrian people to The Hague.
Okay, I want to pick up on 3 specific points you've mentioned, because so much of that is what we need to talk about. Okay, Fadil, let's start with you, because your Syrian Network for Human Rights says over the years of the war, more than 80,000 people have been disappeared. Yahya says when someone is disappeared and detained, it doesn't only affect that person, it affects the whole family. Nadim Houri, who writes for Human Rights Watch, he says that a defector told him in 2014, this is the direct quote from the defector from the regime, detaining someone limits their ability to act, but disappearing them paralyzes the entire family. The family will divert all their energies to finding them as a tool for control. It can hardly be beaten. Is it your opinion, Fadil, that the Syrian regime has deliberately been disappearing people?
Of course, this is the war of weapons used from the regime since the beginning, actually. So, tenth of Syrian citizens have been disappeared forcibly by the regime, actually. And those are not estimation. We have data, and we keep sending cases to the United Nations forcibly disappeared group, and they always correspond to the regime. So now we are, what's happened now? Now the regime is trying to reveal the fate of some cases. Now approximately 600 cases have been revealed. Ammar said, okay, let's finalize this issue, but finalize it how? By this sadistic way, and to shock the family that we killed your lovers. We killed them because of torture, the majority of them, some of them executed by the military court. But and without any independent investigation, we don't know what is the criteria for the regime to torture those Syrian citizens inside the center detention, or to sentence them by the military court. They don't have any types of rights by lawyer or by allow their family to know who's captured them or who arrest them or to visit them. They have been disappeared since some of them more than 4 years, 6 years. And we have those individually. We have their Syrian cards, Syrian ID cards. We have the testimony from the families where those have been arrested. So we have all the documents. By other hand, the regime now, by announcing their fate, the regime actually accused himself. Why? Because the head of the regime, and Ammar knows that, and the Russian as well, declared several times that we don't have forcibly disappeared Syrians. We are not arresting people. So he denied those. Now, how is coming to know to reveal their fate if the regime not the one who actually arrest them?
Okay,
this is the first.
Okay, listen. You talk about potentially Russia knowing what was going on, but certainly one of the theories is, Vyacheslav, is it not, that Russia, Moscow, has put pressure on Bashar al-Assad to reveal these details now, and they're by no means complete. There are tens of thousands of other people. Amnesty International saying that 13,000 people have been executed who have been in detention. And in 2014, 4 years ago, a defector came out with photographs. He had all the details of how people were treated in detention, where they were killed, how they were killed, where the bodies were placed. So why, 4 years later, is this news coming out? Is this Moscow's way of trying to move forward with the Syrian war?
Well, I think that we are now discussing the situation, how to exchange by detainees, exchange by bodies of those who are the sacrifices is a struggle. 7 years it is war. And what is the task we should to look to today? If we choose the way to arrange, as I heard here, or investigation, make investigation, this is another one story. But if we arranging exchange of detainees or some other bodies of those who fell in the battles, I think it is another story.
Yes.
I think that today we're discussing how to arrange peaceful. I don't believe that some international organizations like White Casks are associated with them, humanitarian international bodies are respond the demands, because Russia doesn't believe. And we do know exactly right now that White Casks were connected with terrorism.
Okay, that's a separate issue. Vyacheslav, that's a separate issue.
False information for international bodies.
Okay, we're talking specifically. We're talking specifically about what's happened to people who have been detained by Bashar al-Assad's forces. Vyacheslav says it's time to talk peace, that this is a way forward to reach a peaceful negotiation. You represent the opposition. Is it time to talk peace? Does this help?
Well, we appreciate this Russian position that they want to talk peace, because they have been since 2015 bombarding, killing people, etc., etc. I believe what is happening in Syria with regard to the release of these certificates that they died, the party that is behind this is Russia itself. Because Russia now believes that after the control of the geography, almost all the geography of Syria, now they are going to move into a political settlement. And one of the issues that was raised in UN Security Council resolutions, be they the Geneva Communique or Resolution 2254, is the issue of the prisoners or detainees or those in jails, in the Assad jails. It's not a matter of exchange. If the opposition has 5 people, the regime has 5,000. So this is the case. And we, as in the opposition, are against detaining the freedom of anybody. Now, Russia is moving into this direction because those files were brought up in Astana. And we discussed this with Mr. Lavrentiev. We said the issue of the detainees, the prisoners, is a priority for Syrian people. And he promised at Astana 7 or 8 to go to Damascus and open this file with the Assad regime. And in the next round of Astana, he came back and we knew what happened to him. Opening this file for the regime is deadly, period. Now, what is behind this pressure for opening this and settling this issue in their mind is the Russians. They are saying to them, well, the issue of the detainees is a very important one. Let's move it. Now the refugees also, we need to take care of it. Now the issues of the detainees, the prisoners, is a very crucial one. You are talking about 500,000 people and 55,000 pictures of those who were tortured in jails. 11,000 of them were shown in different places by Caesar.
Okay, let's put that question to Ammar. Okay, it's a very important question. Ammar, is Bashar al-Assad going to release the details of where these bodies are? Will the families get to see the bodies? Will there be a chance to perform post-mortems, autopsies on these bodies, which will show, presumably you believe that they haven't been tortured, but will those post-mortems prove that? Will the families get the bodies?
Well, first of all, we're assuming that they died under torture. There isn't anything to say that...
That's the allegation from much of the world.
We know... Yes, exactly. That's the allegation, but it's yet to be proven. Let's not take that as a fact. Some of them might have died from all sorts of causes. Now, what the government plans to do, we don't know. We actually don't know. We're just here to monitor and try to explain what is happening. What their plan is, we don't know. Why they haven't made this move last year, for example, we don't know. Presumably, one might think, is that they were thinking that at the time it might have led to more turmoil. Let's delay it a little bit, for example, to this year and so on and so forth, whilst the state is more stable and everybody is trying to buy in a more stable state. Now, there is this image that is distorting the whole. There is this perception that is distorting the whole way we look at this. Take, for example, a state official whose task is to protect people. Would he be inclined or encouraged to take or arrest people and try to get word out of them, no matter how he does that, in order to prevent the next suicide bomb? We've seen, for example, in the past few years in the city of Homs, where suicide bombers targeted children and schools. Incident after incident, the people of Homs went to the streets and asked for the sacking of the governor. State officials have been throughout this whole episode, ugly episode, under tremendous pressure. They wanted to prevent suicide bombers from getting into civilian areas. Now, would they come and try to pluck out whatever information in order to protect these people? I'm sure they would. That's not condoning, though, that there was no apparently due judicial process where they were tried and whatever it is, even executed. We don't know. But this has been an ugly scene. Now, we need to look forward. And the way to look forward isn't only for people who had relatives or loved ones detained with the governments, but it's also the other side of the equation, which are people who had detainees within the terrorist groups in, for example, Latakia, Damascus, Ghouta, and most recently, actually, in Suwaida. People do care about these loved ones and what they have been. I mean, I'll give you an example, personal example. I had a cousin who died in 2013 when his unit in eastern Ghouta was overrun by, I think, Jaish al-Islam or whatever it was. Now, the Jaish al-Islam people kept ringing his parents using his mobile phone, telling them that your son is alive and we need this money and that money. They abused them, basically. They abused their emotions. There are all sorts of chapters, hideous chapters, associated with the detainees. It's not only the government.
Okay.
It's only part of it.
I understand.
The government is only part of it. So we need to look in a more holistic way.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, we're running out of time, and you've been throwing it forward. I've been continuing to bring it back to the detainees and the updated registry of those who have died. So just in the last few minutes, Fadil, how do you see the future of Syria as far as Syrians themselves are concerned? Is it possible, even when this eventually ends, for such a divisive and brutal conflict to allow people who are on opposing sides to live in the same place? Or will those who eventually lose this battle have to leave Syria?
Of course, the Syrian society, which they make the uprising, will not accept that their lovers died because of torture or forcibly disappeared without any type of investigation. The accountability for those who committed the crime against humanity, tens of thousands of crimes against humanity, the only way to move forward. We need the government and the regime to be held accountable, actually. Otherwise, the Syria will be unstable for decades, actually, and the revenge will be the only way. It's unfair, actually, to compare the systematic tens of thousands from crime against humanity from the regime himself by other groups. If we compare the scale, the regime committed more than 85% from the regime and his allies, the Russian and the Iranian, 85 till 90% from the total crimes. So if there is no accountability, there will be no justice at all. The society will be unstable. So that, based on that, we believe that this regime will be unaccepted at all from the Syrian. And if the Russians care about the Syrian stability, they should bear in their mind to remove this regime and of course the Iranian are engaged with the regime in those crimes.
Okay, listen, we're just running out of time, Father. You mentioned Russia saying it should remove the regime. Vyacheslav, that's never been anything that Moscow would accept. So what's the bottom line for Russia when it comes to resolving this conflict? Since your country entered the war in September 2015, Bashar al-Assad's forces have been regaining territory. When will you stop supporting the regime and allow the Syrians themselves to sort out a political solution?
I think that the Syrian government proved that stability and proved that it is governing all the Syrian territory, approximately. So now we are talking about exchange of those who felt in this struggle during 7 years. And future is only one, to forget about war, not to convert this discussion into the prolongation of war. It is discussion to how to end the war, but not how to arrange accusations, court, and many other. Is it necessary? It will be specialists who will investigate all cases. I cannot believe in many investigations because I do know that quite a lot of documents that were shown during 7 years of war were falsified. They were not true. They were means of war, but not means of peace.
Okay.
I think that now the question is how to achieve peace, how to help Syrian people, not only government.
Okay, listen, thank you. Yeah, I can give you 30 seconds, but no more. In terms of what Vyacheslav says in negotiating the end of the war, where are we in 30 seconds?
For Russia, you cannot have a proverb in English that says you cannot have the pie and eat it. You can't keep the pie and eat it. They want to keep the regime at the same time. They want just to settle all these things. It's like sewing a wound when it is still bleeding. This regime is the best prescription for the continuity of destruction, for detainees, for displacement of people, for the misery in Syria. They want to keep the regime and they want to rehabilitate it. At the same time, they want to close these files which are unclosable, if I can say so. Now, as Vyacheslav superficially believes that it's a matter of exchange of 5 people for 5,000 people, it's not that. We just sympathize with those people in the coast, in Tartus, in Latakia, in Sweden, like we sympathize with other people who have been being detained for 5 years or more now. It is a matter of opening this file under the pressure of Russia. Russia cannot do this way if they want Syria to come, Syrians to come back to life and to want Syria to start all over again. This is not the way to settle things.
Okay, and we have run out of time. I'm so sorry. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the Newsmakers. Still to come on the Newsmakers, the Catholic Church in Chile asks for forgiveness as prosecutors investigate dozens of allegations of sexual abuse. And a different take on Europe's migrant crisis. Portugal is welcoming new arrivals, hoping they'll boost a declining population. For hundreds of years, the Vatican has policed itself through its own judicial system that works behind closed doors. Now, Chilean prosecutors say that's not good enough. They've opened an investigation into 73 bishops, clerics and lay members over a sex abuse scandal that could involve more than 100 victims. Pope Francis has ordered his bishops to cooperate and hand over evidence. But is this an act of self-preservation? Fewer Chileans than ever before consider themselves Catholic, and a new poll says 96% of those who do believe the Church is protecting priests who are facing accusations. With more, here's Christine Pirovilakis.
From schools in the Netherlands to cities across the United States, child sex abuse and cover-ups have long dogged the Roman Catholic Church. And in Chile, Pope Francis has acknowledged there's a culture of abuse.
The church's staff have more responsibility before God, but also before the people of Chile and for the crimes that have been committed with children.
Today, 78 members of the Catholic Church are under investigation for sexual abuse involving 104 victims as far back as the 1960s. Now, Chilean bishops are pleading for forgiveness.
We have failed in our duties as priests for not listening, believing, tending to and supporting the victims of these grave sins and injustices committed by priests and other religious authorities.
Since June, authorities have carried out raids on several churches, and there have been allegations the Catholic Church covered up or failed to properly look into accusations of abuse. One priest has since been arrested on charges of sexually abusing 7 children since 2002. And Chile's highest-ranking Catholic official, Cardinal Ricardo Ezzati, is under investigation and is expected to testify in the suspected cover-up of sex crimes. And it matters to a lot of people in a country where just over half of the population follow the religion. According to a survey by Latino Barometro, a non-profit, confidence in the church has dropped from 80% in 1996 to 34% last year, leaving many people to wonder how much further it can fall. Once applauded as a fearless Catholic reformer, Pope Francis has come under fire for his handling of sex abuse scandals within the church. During a trip to Chile in January, he faced criticism for defending Bishop Barros, long accused of covering up abuse reports.
Here in Chile, there are bishops who should be or who are in jail, or who at least should be relieved of their posts. The Pope knows it, but isn't doing anything because he is a coward.
The Pope recognized his mistake and apologized.
Y aquí no puedo dejar de manifestar el dolor y la vergüenza que siento ante el daño irreparable causado a niños por parte de ministros de la Iglesia.
Promising justice, Pope Francis dispatched investigators to Chile to look into the accusations of sexual abuse. The 2,300-page report that followed found priests who had been accused of wrongdoing were simply reshuffled to new parishes, and that evidence had been destroyed in the process. All of the country's bishops have offered the Pope their resignation. So far, they've been accepted from Bishop Barros and 4 others. The church says it has also changed its stance and is urging victims to take their stories to prosecutors. But has it done enough to ensure that the abuse doesn't happen again? Christine Pirovolakis, The Newsmakers.
To discuss this, I'm joined from Tucson, Arizona by Tim Lennon. He is the president of the Survivors Network of those abused by priests. And in New York, we have Father Robert Gall, a professor at the Pontifical University of the Holy Cross, also a correspondent for the Catholic news journal, The Tablet. Thank you for your time. Welcome to the Newsmakers, gentlemen. Father Gall, I'd like to start with you. Many people would say that over the past many decades, the Catholic Church has behaved more like a criminal organization when it comes to how it's treated these allegations and also those proven cases of sexual abuse by priests. This is supposed to, of course, be an institution that cares for the most needy of society, and yet it's been involved in all of these cover-ups that have reflected so badly on the Catholic Church. What would you say to that?
Well, very rightly, much is expected from the Catholic Church because the Catholic Church presents itself as an organization founded by Jesus, founded by God himself, and therefore meant to live in a pristine way, morality, including sexual morality. So indeed, these scandals are very bruising, but they're also an opportunity for purification. In fact, the Catholic Church needs to set herself as on the lampstand so that we can be an example to the world of purity and of correct living, including seeking proper criminal investigations in order to identify culprits, in order to defend the good name of so many holy people in the Church.
Yes, but why is it only acted after the accusations were made? There were so many instances of allegations of people in communities knowing what was going on, the Catholic Church. There are many instances, you know it yourself, in one particular case, a priest who was known to have abused minors and teenagers was taken to the Vatican and given a position there so that he wouldn't have to answer for his crimes. And the Vatican Church also regarding these abuses as sins rather than crimes under civil law. These are all issues that the Catholic Church has not faced up to until after the accusations were made and they became so public the Church couldn't do anything else but confront them.
So Adnan, rightly you speak about the gravity of the scandal and the fact that not only are the victims themselves who've been abused by people in power in the church, is that itself a scandal, especially in those survivors who themselves underwent that. And it's especially grievous in the Catholic Church because oftentimes those in authority represent God himself, and therefore there's this religious component that it's an offense directly against God. It's a sacrilege, and it's extremely grievous. But at the same time, you're mentioning the fact that there's a network of people who have been covering that up and haven't been pursuing it, which is in a sense worse because it allowed for a multiplication of these events. And this is why under Pope Francis now there's an effort to reform, and it's why, for instance, in the case of Chile, all of the bishops presented their resignations so that there can be a new purity, a beginning again, so that the church can be an exemplar for other institutions. In fact, it's known by sociologists that there are cases of sexual abuse that are underway in other sectors of society. In fact, numerically, unfortunately, it's very sad to consider that most sexual abuse occurs in the family, and quite a bit occurs in schools, often in state-run schools and public schools. But rightly, much is expected of the Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church must absolutely live according to a higher bar, a higher standard. And that's why this reform is underway in the Church. And right now, thankfully, the media is also very, very engaged in helping the Catholic Church in order to identify the problems and pursue this purification so that lay people can also be engaged through the information that the media facilitates to the civil society so that those who are in power can be accountable to those who are stakeholders in the Catholic Church.
What do you make of that, Tim, that the reforms are purifying the Church?
So far, I believe it's just symbolism. You can have resignations, but without actions, it doesn't have much meaning. For instance, in the Conference of Bishops of Chile, they still do not require bishops to report all sexual abuse of children to the police. I believe in the Conference of Bishops in Italy, it's the same thing. I don't know how many other organizations within the church compel bishops to report crimes to civil society. So that's an important reform right there. That's an action. Instead of just resignations, we need the Pope to say, every diocese in the world needs to report sexual abuse of children to the police. It's a criminal matter. It should not be investigated or withheld or covered up by the church. The other thing the Pope could do immediately would be to say, we're going to open the books. We can see in Pennsylvania where the civil society looks at these dioceses. They bring out a tremendous amount of information of what the Attorney General of Pennsylvania called predator priests and complicit by bishops of covering up. So it's civil society that is going to protect children. We can't rely on the church institution because historically we've seen that they've seen their reputation as more important than the health and safety of children.
That's a very important point, is it not, Father Gould? Because being punished by the church is nowhere near similar to being punished under civil law. And the Pope has now told his members of the church in Chile to cooperate with the authorities and bring the evidence to them. Is that revolutionary, what he's asked them to do?
Yes, indeed, and it's revolutionary what the Bishops' Conference in Chile just did a few hours ago. And so thank you very much, Tim. In fact, you're pointing to the fact that the church needs to be accountable to people like yourself. So the men and women in the pews, also those who are survivors of clerical malfeasance, the church must be accountable to them. And that is why the Bishops' Conference of Chile just came out with a very important document just a few hours ago in which they assert the need. So they affirm it with a commitment. In fact, they use the word in Spanish, compromiso. So it's a series of, which means commitment, in the letter from the entire Conference of Bishops saying that they are going to now report to the civil authorities. They've also established a channel for communication with these civil authorities, and they directly with the Bishops' Conference. And they've also asked that working with the civil authorities, that they study the possibility of extending the statute of limitations for these more serious crimes of abuse of young people, of minors. So this is what the Pope is asking for in general throughout the world, but he hasn't imposed it throughout the Church universally, because I'm sure you can appreciate that not every country is known for a right order and sleek efficiency of their civil law, and in fact there are quite a few countries where the Church is presently persecuted. So you could imagine, I could give a list of the countries where there is a tremendous lack of religious freedom and where the Catholic Church is actively persecuted. I don't think it would be fair to require necessarily the bishops in those countries to deliver this information to the civil authorities. But all the more important that they clean house and that they make sure that that they have entirely safe environments. So there's even more importance in the Church that is living in conditions of martyrdom to live up to the moral teaching of the Church.
Tim, how have things changed? Well, carry on, Tim, go on.
Well, I just think this whole thing about martyrdom, I mean, we can see that tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of children have been raped and sexually abused and been covered up by the Church. And it's only because of civil society, of organizations like the Royal Commission on Australia or the Pope getting caught in lies down in Chile that has forced these kinds of reforms. It hasn't been an internal process of protecting children. It's only because they've been exposed. And as we see that in Pennsylvania, 300 predator police have been exposed there. It boggles me that so many children have been harmed for so long, and the Church has been so resistant for fundamental change. I think that's the real issue, and how it's going to be reformed. For instance, in the state of New York, the Conference of Bishops of New York has spent $2 million to stop strengthening laws to protect children. Same thing in Pennsylvania, that we have Catholic organization hierarchy opposing stronger child protection laws. That needs to stop. There needs to be civil society rules, not Church opposing the protection of children.
Tim, how have things changed in the past, say, 20 years, in your experience with the people that you work with? When someone makes an accusation, how have things changed in terms of how that accusation then comes to be investigated and may potentially lead to a priest being found guilty or anyone in the Catholic Church?
Well, a fact is that 3/4 of victims of child sex abuse never come forward. So what we've seen in the last 20 years is a greater community awareness of the ubiquity of child abuse, especially in those institutions like the Catholic Church that covers it up. So we've seen more awareness, and because of more awareness, survivors or victims have seen that they're not alone, that they can get better, that there's help. And I think that's a dramatic change, that society has changed. And if we see, like in Pennsylvania or in the Royal Commission in Australia, or the investigations in newspapers like in Boston or Dallas or Los Angeles, or the commissions in Ireland, that when civil society investigates, that's the real benefit of civil society protecting children.
Father Gall, last word to you. This is from the Catholic Herald. In 1970, Latin America was 92% Catholic. In 95, 80% Catholic. In 2018, 59% Catholic. By 2030, fewer than 50% of Latin Americans will identify themselves as Catholics. How much is this intervention by Pope Francis in Chile about the self-preservation of the Catholic Church in Latin America?
Well, what's most important for the preservation and the continuation of the Catholic Church is that we be authentic and that we be faithful to the tradition that we've received. And part of that fidelity is certainly to live an upright moral life. And above all, clergy must live in a way that is exemplary. And then they must challenge the lay people also to live in a spirit of holiness, so that we can help one another to strive for this holiness. And Tim, thank you. You're mentioning that there are features of change and reform in the Catholic Church. I hope, and I really and I think along with you that the church is, because I know how much you love the church is turning a corner. And you mentioned this grand jury report in Pennsylvania. I think one of the bright lights is this, the Bishop Gaynor of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, who came out with a very clear statement of even anticipating the news coming from the grand jury report in order to collaborate with the civil authorities and to really get to the bottom of some of the corruption that was present in the diocese before he took over its governance. Let's hope that this is authentic, and let's hope that there really be this accountability within the church, and that this be a moment of really clarity and purification reform. Certainly we priests who are in the church desire it, because we want to be faithful. We want all of the priests to be respected because of their fidelity of life. And we want to be aided by lay people, and like you, Tim, who can hold us up to this high standard of accountability.
Father Robert Gall, Tim Lennon, thank you very much indeed, gentlemen.
I am lucky. Most of our friends leave them in the sea when they are coming from Libya to Italy, or from Egypt to Italy. They are sinking in the middle of the sea.
Many refugees risk their lives crossing the Mediterranean to reach Europe, only to be shunned by countries like Italy, Hungary and Poland. But there is one nation holding a welcome sign for them. Portugal's Prime Minister says his biggest refugee problem is that the country isn't attracting more of them. Many migrants who do come then leave. So Antonio Costa's government is simplifying the bureaucracy some foreigners face when trying to live and work in Portugal. And to explain how and why Portugal is taking a different approach to most other EU nations, let's go to Brussels and speak to Catherine Woolard, who's the Secretary General of the European Council on Refugees and Exiles. Welcome to the Newsmakers. What's your take on this move by Portugal?
I think it just shows a continuation of Portugal's positive approach to migration and asylum. It really is exemplary, and the most positive example currently in Europe of a country that has a rational and humanitarian approach to migration and refugee policy.
What's the rational element there that you're talking about? Is it what Antonio Costa says is a demographic demand, that he needs 75,000 people a year to come to Portugal just to sustain the level of job employment rates?
Indeed, and it's not just Portugal. The real crisis in Europe is the demographic crisis. Every country in Europe needs newcomers, needs new populations in order to tackle the declining birth rates and the ageing of the population. Portugal is the only country that's put in place as a priority, as I say, a rational evidence-based approach to migration, with its approach of trying to attract more migrants. At the same time, it's also supporting European efforts by supporting the relocation programme, doing the most, again, of most of all European countries in order to relocate refugees from Italy and Greece. So what Portugal is trying to do is create a win-win situation where it tackles its problem of population decline, but at the same time it offers opportunities for migrants and it offers protection for refugees. We would really like to see other countries following this example.
Do you know what the population's reaction is in general? Because, of course, you well know, it's well documented that in many countries in Western Europe there's a fear amongst the general populace that these new arrivals, who are usually not white people, are going to erode Western culture, that they also pose a security threat to the countries they arrive in. What do the Portuguese say? Do you know?
Well, I think in Portugal, but it's the case in fact across Europe, we should be careful not to overstate the opposition to refugees. In fact, it's the case in the majority of European countries that the majority of the population remains supportive of offering protection to refugees. What's different about Portugal is that the political leaders and Prime Minister Costa, as you've already mentioned, have taken a very strong stance in resisting all types of xenophobia and putting forward a welcoming message. We see problems developing when political leaders stand up and either try to generate popular fear or they exploit popular fear. This is what's happened in Italy, for instance. So I think also in this sense, Portugal is a positive example, and we would like to see more leaders refusing to go down the road of the extremist and populist approach. And let's remember that most of those parties that have extremist anti-refugee views are by no means a majority. Very few of them are actually in power.
How can you at the European Council stop these new arrivals in Portugal then leaving for another EU country? Internal migration is a big challenge for the European Union. It almost brought down Angela Merkel's government in Germany, of course. What can you do about that?
Well, I think the reason for secondary movement in the 2015 crisis was due to the poor reception conditions, particularly in Greece. And it was already the case from 2011 that the European Court of Human Rights had declared that Greece was not safe for asylum seekers and refugees and had made it illegal for other countries to return people to Greece in recognition of the real problems with reception but also asylum procedures there. So it was not surprising that people wanted to move on. I think there has been some issues with secondary movement within Portugal, but I expect we'll now see that changing as a critical mass, as a community of refugees is being established in Portugal. Let's remember the reasons why people move to another country are often also quite reasonable. They want to reunite with family members, they go looking for work, they want to go to countries where they think the overall economic prospects are better. What Portugal is doing now is trying to make it easier to integrate there. So for instance, simplifying the bureaucracy attached to setting up your own business. And we see with many refugees that the best way for them to enter the labour market is through setting up their own businesses. So this is a welcome move. There's also increased investment in language teaching, and acquisition of language in any country is crucial. In Portugal, it's been a particular challenge for newcomers. Partly because the history of migration is attached to Lusophone countries, people arrived speaking Portuguese. So I think these efforts to ensure that the rights of the people that they're relocating and the people who are arriving there are respected will pay off, not just in the long term, but I would expect now in the short to medium term that we see an increasing stability and desire to settle in Portugal of the populations that are arriving there.
Catherine Woolard, thank you very much indeed for your time. That's all for this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Adnan Nawaz. Do check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, did US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson stop Saudi Arabia from invading Qatar? And did it cost him his job? Until then, thanks for watching. Goodbye.